Hello, everyone. This is Deborah Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. If you are looking for vendor process training for you or your entire vendor team, head over to my site at deborahrrichardson.com and click on the Vendor Team Training Solved button to learn more about what is included in the annual plan and also to download a training schedule. Get the training that you and your team needs to avoid payment fraud, duplicate vendors, compliance fines, and more. If your team is responsible for maintaining vendor data in your vendor master file, if you haven't already, you may be asked to identify, validate, and maintain the diversity status of your vendors. Now, if you have that deer in the headlight look like I did, then Neeraj Shah is here today to talk about the what, why, how, and where of supplier diversity. So, keep listening. Welcome to episode 185, What AP Teams Need to Know About Supplier Diversity and the Vendor Master File, with Neeraj Shah, founder of Supplier.io. All right, so on this podcast, I talk about authentication techniques, internal controls, and best practices in vendor processes to avoid fraud, regulatory fines, and just overall bad vendor data. And many of you as listeners or also my subscribers or, people that land on my site will reach out to me with questions. Lately, and all of a sudden, I have been getting questions on diversity. Many AP teams haven't had to deal with identifying vendors as diverse before, and now have been given an initiative to identify diverse vendors in their accounting system or ERP, and just don't even know where to start. And when I was a practitioner, that was me too. And so today I have brought in the big guns. Joining me to provide needed education and diversity and your vendors is Neeraj Shah, who is the founder of Supplier.io, which is a global leader in supplier diversity solutions for over 20 years. So welcome, Neeraj. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, quick background of you and the company you founded, Supplier.io?
Absolutely. First of all, Deborah, thank you for inviting me to this podcast. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to talk about some of the problems you identified up front on supply diversity. So my name is Neeraj Shah. I am the founder of Supplier.io, as you mentioned. I've been in the space for supply diversity for over 20 years. We've been working with companies that have, that try to establish robust programs for diverse businesses. And that goes from companies that are just starting out their programs to companies that spend multi-billions of dollars with diverse businesses. And our goal is to make sure that they can get the data that they need, they can get the services that they need, and essentially have enough visibility into their spending and their suppliers to be able to make an impact through supply diversity. I started Supplier.io about 10 years ago with the focus primarily on data, right? You mentioned about data, and we'll get more into that a little bit more later during our conversation. But the biggest challenge that people had was identifying diverse businesses. So we started out with that focus on that. And since then have kind of grown into providing additional capabilities around software and discovery services, and going further down into the supply chain for identifying diverse spending, and so on. So today we work with over 550 different customers, again, across the whole spectrum of maturity of supply diversity programs and pretty much companies in every industry, because this is now, as you mentioned early on, a fairly broad and universal requirement.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you for that. It certainly sounds like I invited the right one to the show today. So, before we really dive into diversity and the codes, the categories, the classifications, and then talking about certifications, let's just talk about diversity data and why all of a sudden it's trending as a must know for vendors and why buyers that haven't yet jumped on this trend should?
So that's a great question. We've been working with companies that have been doing supply diversity for over 50 years, right? So supply diversity is not a new topic, but it has definitely over the past several decades become more and more broadly adopted. Uh, what happened is in the 2.5 years ago or 2 years ago at this point, uh, there was a lot of awakening around how companies need to do more for minority businesses, women-owned businesses, and so on, and how they can actually make a difference. And some of this was triggered through the George Floyd murder that happened, unfortunately, some time ago. But there was a aggregation of different types of metrics that were going on and different types of forces that kind of all combined into led to an increased focus on supply diversity as one of the things that people need to focus on more, right? So shareholders today are asking for more focus on ESG, which is an environment, social, and governance practices, and supply diversity happens to be part of that. There was a lot of focus that companies started 2 years ago to do things to help diverse businesses grow and use that as a way of making a difference in their community. And when you look at the new generation that's coming into the workforce, they are also asking for better practices for companies to focus on in terms of diversity and inclusion. And all of these different forces seem to have come together and have suddenly led to this increase in focus on supply diversity, along with other focuses on other aspects of diversity also. So what's happened now is that today either your employees will ask you for diversity information, or more importantly, your board and customers will ask you for information. And sometimes it's also now a compliance requirement where some states and some governments also require supply diversity information. So while the federal government has required this information from their contractors for a very long time, more and more customers are now asking their larger suppliers to adopt supply diversity practice and collect this data. So as you mentioned, as when you were in a practitioner role, you were collecting this information. That was probably to meet one of these requirements. Either some of your customers were asking for this, either you were reporting to a government entity and you needed the data, or your employees were demanding it, and the company needed to publish this internally to their employees and to their board. So all of these factors have come together and has just led to an increased focus on supply diversity. And the thing that we have seen in the past 2 years is previously this used to be something that very large companies would do, but now this has increased to practically any company. If you have $100 million or more in revenue, you tend to at least be aware of supply diversity and have something in place to engage diverse businesses, or at least track that. So it's become more of a widely adopted practice, along with other sustainability and ESG practices in the supply chain. So something that if you are not aware of, I'm sure you will hear of soon. And if you're not already doing this, there are many things that you can do easily today to make it easy for you and your company to adopt supply diversity practice when the time actually comes.
So really, it's been around, right, for decades, but the recent events in the past 2 years have really increased the focus using diverse vendors, which means that if you're going to report on it, you have to have those vendors identified in your vendor master file. And That's where we get to the questions that I've had from AP team members, so accounts payable team members and purchasing team members, depending on who has, oversight over the vendor master file. That's where typically you house the diversity classifications. And so that's where I've been getting the questions about diversity because we really don't know where to start. And I will tell you too, as a practitioner, I mean, we had that in our accounting system, but we had a different group. And so I never knew anything about it. We would just add whatever they told us to add when they gave us information. As a matter of fact, Neeraj, we had that question on our vendor setup form and then later on our portal, and we never really even enforced it. But I guess that has changed today.
It has, and I think you kind of nailed the problem right there, which is, for your audience, people who are working on the AP side in their organization, they're the initial source of this data, right? So your entire supply diversity program for most companies relies on the data. They need to know who their diverse suppliers are, how much are they spending with these businesses, is their spend with these businesses increasing? Did some of them stop being diverse? Did new suppliers come on being diverse? And all of that is maintained through the vendor data or the vendor master, right?
Yep.
So as an AP team, as you are onboarding suppliers, or as you're maintaining the record or information for your suppliers, you own the source and the key, the key metric for tracking and making sure that the information that your company is looking at, viewing, and reporting externally is accurate, right? And the challenge with the diversity data is several folds when you look at the accounts payable side of things. One you just mentioned, which is many people are not aware what they're even looking for, right? There are, today we track almost 17 different diversity codes, right? And there's a lot of different nuances around what needs to be tracked, how it needs to be tracked. And many times it's not, unless you have a good background in supply diversity, it might be difficult for you to, first of all, even collect this information. And then when you collect it, as you mentioned it, validating it. How do you make sure that a company that told you that they are a woman-owned business or they are a minority-owned business are truly that, right? So there's a lot of information that comes in around, first of all, knowing what to collect, second, actually collecting it, third, validating it, and lastly, keeping that up to date. One thing with information about suppliers, diverse supply diversity, is that it can change, right? Tomorrow, a diverse business might sell the company to somebody else, or if it was a woman-owned business and the owner, turns it over to their son, it stops being a woman-owned business, right? So different things can happen, and what we see is every month about a tenth of your suppliers will lose their status or change their status, and it is important to keep that up to date. And doing that in a manual fashion just gets very difficult. So keeping that vendor master up to date is critical. What you need is a nice way of being able to do it in a bulk fashion.
I'm glad you brought that up because, again, that just kind of falls into what AP or procurement or the vendor team does. Like all the information in the vendor master file, you have to make sure that it stays accurate. And I guess diversity data is no different. So yeah, so let's start back at just kind of the basics of diversity data, because I will tell you the first thing I think about is really confusion, right, over what diversity codes or categories or classifications are, which are certified by a third party, which are self-certified. How can you tell? What does it matter? So can you talk about what are diversity classifications? How is that different from diversity certifications, including self-certification? Because that part always just confused me.
Absolutely. And you're right. There is a lot of confusion around, first of all, what qualifies as a diverse vendor. And this doesn't make it any easy, but it's almost like every company or every customer seems to have their own definition of what they count as diverse, right? And but to kind of step back a little bit and see what is a diverse vendor in a holistic sense of way, and then we can get into how different companies and different customers might expect data from you on that. So diversity usually falls into three broad groups that most companies track businesses by. One is the gender diversity, which is the business owned by a minority, sorry, by a woman or by a male. So that's one set of diversity there. And generally, companies are looking to support women-owned businesses, right? Second thing is ethnic diversity, which is this owned by an ethnic minority who owns at least 51% of the business. So it might be Asians, Hispanic, Blacks, Native American, and so on. So being able to kind of identify what the ethnic ownership is. And the last one is size diversity, which is that we all know small businesses drive a lot of the economy in the US and practically every country out there. So size diversity means are we able to support small businesses, local businesses that might be able to support communities, where the business operates. So these three are the general categories of business diversities that are there: ethnic diversity, gender diversity, and size diversity. We have other layers that have been added onto that as well, which is veteran ownership, right? Which is have the government introduced programs to support veterans that come back from wars, like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and to support the people who come back from there and be able to support their entrepreneurship. Veteran ownership programs were created. And now LGBT ownership and disabled ownership is also there. So again, there are a lot of different varieties of diversity, and it kind of makes it a little bit of an alphabet soup when you try to look at all the different ones that are there. But most companies will usually have some common ones, which is gender diversity. So they will definitely look at women-owned businesses, and ethnic diversity, which they'll look at minority-owned businesses. And more and more commonly, they're looking at veteran-owned and LGBTQ-owned businesses as well, right? So those are the general levels of it. Sorry, you had a question?
Yep. My question is, it's defined and we add those diversity classifications to our vendor setup form or to our vendor portal, and then we get to certification. So let's say if our company has defined that they want to work with women-owned businesses. So we have that on our vendor setup form or on our vendor portal, and they check that, yes, I am a woman-owned business. So is that something that they can check and say, yes, that's great, they're self-certified? Or do we look for certifications? And what's really the difference between that self-certification and third-party certification?
Yeah, that's excellent. And one of the things, if you recall, we had talked about earlier, is one of the responsibilities that falls into AP or whoever manages the vendor master is to verify that the data that you're getting is accurate. And for supplier diversity, the way that companies can track that is through a third-party certification. Now, the difference between self-certification and a third-party certification is that a self-certification, I could come to your business and say that I'm minority-owned. My business is minority-owned business, and you're taking me at my word for it. Now, most likely, as with most situations, people are telling the truth and it is accurate. But if you are reporting this externally, or some customer contract, or more importantly, government contract might be reliant on it, and in some cases there might be penalties for not meeting those targets, you want to have some more proof around it, some validation to say that, yes, there is the person saying that they're a minority business is truly minority owned. So for that, that's where a third-party certification comes in. And a majority of companies out there today do require a third-party certification just for that reason, right? Because ownership is tough to figure out. In US, much of the ownership data is not publicly available. And so you're relying on either on the person's word for it, or you have to rely on a third party that will actually look at the ownership documents, look at the company structure, and validate whether the company truly qualifies as minority-owned or women-owned or veteran-owned, or even a small business at times, based on the definitions of those specific categories, right? So most of our customers do require certifications. The one big exception to that is when you are dealing with the federal government. The federal government used to have a certification program of their own as well, and they still do it for some categories. But the federal government now also accepts self-certification just because of the volume of businesses they deal with. So obviously, the federal government comes with the ability to enforce legally if you misrepresent yourself. So that's a big push for people to be accurate in what they claim. But if you're reporting to federal government or if you're working with the federal government, many companies will accept self-certifications. But outside of that, almost all customers we work with require some form of certification to validate the fact that the companies are diverse.
Got it. Okay. All right. So if your company is reporting externally, then they are looking for that third party certification.
Or even internally, if they're reporting to the
Yes.
board or they're reporting to the senior
Yes.
management. If I'm a supply diversity manager, I want to be confident that when I present to my board or to my CEO that we are spending, let's say, $100 million with minority-owned businesses, then I'm confident of the number. Nobody should be able to look through my data and say, hey, I see that you put Dell computers in there and we know that they're not minority-owned businesses, just because for some reason the data was misrepresented or somebody entered it incorrectly. So to be able to have that comfort in the fact that what you're representing is true, most companies will require some form of certification for it.
Okay, so I do want to talk about certification. I've got one deep dive question on that. But before we get to that, you mentioned in your response about US and how the diversity status is not always publicly available in the US. And that brought up a question for me. So in your vendor master file, you have US vendors, you have non-US vendors. Does diversity data apply to both sets, or are we only looking at US vendors?
So supply diversity is most prominent in the US. It's been around for 50 years, and more companies are aware of it, and it's a much more accepted and adopted program in the US. Having said that, many international or other countries are also looking at implementing supply diversity. But the definition of what is a diverse supplier in that country is different. So for example, what is a minority-owned business is different in Canada than it would be in the US, is different in the UK than when it might be in the US, right? It's different for example, in India than it might be in the US. So the definition of diverse business it changes for each country, and the level of adoption of supply diversity also changes in each country. The US is the furthest ahead, but then you have the Europe, UK, Australia, South Africa, Canada. Many of these countries are beginning to adopt these programs as well. And so it does apply outside of the US, but it may be a little bit less common than what you see in the US.
Okay. So deep dive on the certification and the validation piece, because as you stated before, you're absolutely correct. When we put information in our vendor master file, as we're onboarding vendors and even just checking to make sure that everything is still accurate, we have to do validations on the data. And so, scenario. Let's just say I'm in accounts payable. I am responsible for onboarding the vendor. And that means I'm also responsible for identifying a diverse vendor, either because it's on a setup form or in our portal. And a vendor checked the box that they were a veteran owned business, but did not indicate that they were certified, did not fill in the fields we had for certification time periods or expiration date. Can I just go to the Veteran Affairs site and search to see if they're certified? Like, how do I verify what their certification is if they have one?
Great point. First of all, one thing to know is that not all suppliers are certified. I could be a veteran-owned business, but not actually get a veteran-owned certification. But let's assume that they are, and you want to validate that in somehow. Then one place you could go to would be the Veterans Administration, and they have a directory of all suppliers that are certified as veteran businesses. But that would be just one of the 370 other sources you could potentially go to, right? So the challenge as a vendor, master manager, or somebody who's entering data in the AP system is being able to validate this quickly and easily. You can manually look at each of these different sources, but that gets to be a challenge very quickly. And if the supplier has given you information as part of their onboarding to say that we are certified through ABC certification agency, then you can definitely look at that as well. But it gets to be a very manual and very tedious and very time-consuming exercise. And that's where somebody like us comes in. What we do is we aggregate data from all of these 370 different certification bodies and put it into one easy database. And if you're looking to validate the supplier, if you're doing it one by one, then you can easily look it up against our database and validate the supplier has a certification. Or what's more commonly done is you will accept the certification at whatever the supplier claims at that point, but then once a month or once a quarter, you just do a mass extract of your list of suppliers. You send it to somebody like us. We run that list against our database of suppliers, and we give you information back very quickly to say, are they certified? Can we validate that they have a certification? And if they do have a certification, is it active? And if it's active, for how long is it still valid, right? So we give you all of that data, and you can get that in a matter of days. That makes it much more quickly, much more quick and much more efficient than trying to check these one by one or even trying to check them at the time of onboarding.
Yeah, and I just thought about something. So we do, as part of the onboarding process for our vendors, we will go to a resource to do, I don't know, the IRS 10 match, where we're checking to make sure that their legal name and their tax ID, that combination matches against IRS records. But the difference between doing that 10 match and doing the diversity one by one lookup is with the 10 match, we're on the same site, right? We're on the same, we're using that one same tool, for multiple vendors, but it's one place to go. Here, you might be going somewhere to look up the veteran-owned business to verify that. Now you might be going somewhere else for small businesses or maybe a minority business. It could be multiple different sites. So so I see, right, the value in going to one resource and being able to look up all your vendors, no matter which diversity classification they identify with.
Yeah, and just to kind of highlight the extent of the problem, for example, today we track around 250,000 minority-owned businesses. But most certifying bodies today, on average, the largest one, a great agency, is the National Minority Supplier Development Council. I mean, they certify 15,000, right? So even when you sign up with them and you get that information, there could be potentially 15 other agencies you have to go and check to validate all that information. It just multiplies the issue significantly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other thing. And I think you touched on it already, but I just wanted to kind of go over it again, because this was the question that I kept having asked to me is, where can I just give my whole vendor master file, upload it, whatever, and just identify which vendors are diverse?
Absolutely. So at some point or the other, if you're looking to do anything with supplier diversity data, you will need to be able to, first of all, identify existing suppliers, then validate and correct your existing data, and then need to keep it up to date. We offer that service. If you want to, there's a free option for you to even check if you have diverse suppliers, and you can go to just our website, supplier.io, and there's a product called Flash Enrichment. Just click on it, upload your suppliers. It'll quickly give you an assessment of what your information looks like, how many diverse suppliers you have, how much you're spending with them. It gives you all of that information very quickly. And if you have a much larger file, and if you want to do it as a process that says, hey, I'm not just looking for a one-time exercise, I want to do it on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis, then we're happy to connect you with one of our experts who can actually guide you towards the process of how it can work in an automated fashion, and also by straight file exchanges. One key thing is that many companies what they're moving towards is trying to integrate it in their ERP or AP system as well. Yeah. So if you are tracking the information in there, our customers can easily pull the data directly from our database in an automated fashion. Imagine the scenario that you onboard, Deborah's podcast company. And as you onboard it, you give us the address, you give us the name. Similar to how you mentioned about the TIN check, you can do a quick call in the back end to our database, and it will come back immediately and say, are they diverse or not? Is Deborah diverse? Does she have certifications? When does the certification expire? And you can do it pretty much seamlessly at the back end. So if you're looking to do it integrated, we can support that. But if you're looking to just start out of the program, I would say the quickest and the easiest thing would be get a list of your vendors, get their addresses, upload it onto a website. You get a free evaluation of how many of your businesses might be diverse, how much you might be spending with each of these different types of categories, and you can get a quick view of it. And it's totally free of cost.
Nice. All right. So you mentioned before pointing out that these certifications expire, right? The third-party certifications expire. And so how often should companies or these AP procurement teams that own the vendor master file, how often should they recheck their vendors to just verify that they're still certified? How often should that be done?
Yeah, so most of these certifications last about a year, right? So if you imagine that, let's say an even distribution, that every month you have the same number of suppliers that have certifications, then about in each month, about a tenth of your certifications will expire, right? So doing it every month can sometimes be a challenge. So what we recommend for most of our customers that they do it at least quarterly to check if a third of the suppliers that might have expired, they can review them and see if they're accurate or not. If again a quarterly turns out to be too frequent, then you should absolutely do it at least once a year, because within that year, almost all the certifications you have would have expired, just because that's the duration of most of your companies, most of your supplier certifications.
All right. And so with that, then, how often does supplier.io refresh? How often do you refresh your information to make sure it's up to date?
A great point, because when we are helping customers identify their diverse businesses, it is important for us to make sure that what we are telling our customers is accurate. So our goal is to make sure that we have the latest, most accurate, and most up-to-date information that's available. So we update our data from all of these 370 sources out there monthly, right? So we are going out to these companies or these agencies, pulling the data down, sometimes calling suppliers directly to make sure that they still have their certifications. And we try to keep our data up to date to the month. So if you send us your data today, then what you can be assured is what you're getting in the information you're getting is something that we had validated in this month, right?
Okay, so if we recheck every quarter, then that means we are going to have more updated information than when we checked the quarter before, because you're updating that on a monthly basis.
That is absolutely true, yes.
Okay,
And a bunch of changes can happen. As I mentioned earlier, some of your companies might stop being diverse. Some of your companies that weren't diverse the previous quarter re-upped their certification and then suddenly became diverse. And others just continue the certification and you just need the updated and new expiration date that gets tied with it.
All right, so that's great information. I think you just solved the where can I upload my whole vendor file and find out my diverse vendors from the many people that I have heard from in the past month or so. But let's kind of flip it. What if I were a diverse supplier or my company wanted to find diverse suppliers? Because, maybe we uploaded the file and we found out we didn't have as many diverse suppliers as we thought we did. And so now we're looking for diverse suppliers. You offer that as well, correct?
We do. So let's take the two parts to your question. If you are a diverse supplier, I highly recommend you get certified. Because many companies out there today, especially now, are looking for many diverse businesses, and often getting certified can be a gate check for them to let people in or engage with specific types of businesses. Not all companies, but many do have that requirement. Second thing is what happens is when you get certified, it shows up in a lot of databases, including ours. So if you're certified today, we have over 10,000 people that search every month into our database looking for diverse businesses. And you never know when you might show up or when the search might come in. But if you are certified, they will show up in there. And as they're looking for diverse businesses, if you come up as somebody that is providing the services that they need, then it's an easy way for them to reach you. Lastly, come to our website. Again, go to Supplier.io and you will find an option to register your business. tell us more about yourself. And again, our 10,000 users that look at these businesses, they'll know more about you and increases the odds of you actually being found. Now, if you are a company that's looking to do business with diverse businesses, we offer the same database that we use to identify which of your company's suppliers were diverse. We also allow you to search it. And it's not just who's certified, by when are they certified. We provide a lot of detailed information, as in what types of products these companies provide, what sizes are they, how long they've been in business, do they have experience in a specific industry. A lot more information that helps you find diverse businesses. Because if you are looking to increase your spending with diverse businesses, there's only two ways to do it. One is take the business companies that you are already doing business with today and spend more with them. Or if you have new opportunities that you're looking for new vendors for, bring on some diverse suppliers. And for the second part, the biggest challenge that most companies have is being able to find diverse businesses. So the database that we provide today is sort of a Google for diverse businesses, where you can search for whatever you want, and you will find suppliers that provide those services.
All right. So if I am a supplier, a vendor, and I want to be found by companies that want to do business with diverse vendors, and it behooves me to register in your portal. Of course, you're going to validate that against your 370 different sources. And then if companies are looking to do business with vendors like me, then they're going to, or they can come to that same database and search for me.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Perfect. You are in our database.
So you really have covered it, right? In identifying those diverse vendors that are existing in your vendor master file. You have a process for that, including that flash enrichment, which I kind of like because you can get that almost immediately. And then you also have the ability to help companies find suppliers. And so really it's kind of a one-stop shop, and you're always updating. So companies can go in and just kind of revalidate, as we're always doing with vendor data, and making sure that it is still up to date. So it sounds like, Neeraj, that this is a one-stop shop, and definitely something that those folks that reached out to me should definitely look into to identify what vendors in their vendor master file right now may be diverse.
Absolutely. And if you are looking to learn more about supply diversity, I welcome you to look at our resources page on our website. We have lots of articles that explain what it is, how companies might set up programs, or how you can, what each of these acronyms even mean. So there's a lot of information there if you're looking to learn about the space. So I highly recommend that you visit our blog area to do that, and sign up for our weekly emails, which will also give you a lot more information about how to manage your programs and what some of the trends are in supply diversity. If you're looking to learn more about and talk to somebody about this, if you can go to supplier.io/accounts payable, we have a dedicated page just for you, and we'd be happy to connect you with somebody who can share more information.
So you do have a lot of resources on your site that can help out folks that are looking to learn more about diverse suppliers. Yeah. Okay, so I think we did good today. Is there anything else that maybe we haven't touched on that you think would be valuable for the accounts payable or procurement team that has responsibility over the vendor master file?
Deborah, I think you've done an amazing job covering all the topics. If you'd like to learn more about our company and talk to somebody about it, then the easiest way would be to submit a contact form through our Supplier IO, and we'll definitely get in touch with you very quickly.
Perfect. So I will also include that link to the contact form in the show notes. All right. Well, thank you very much, Neeraj. This was definitely needed. I'm sure our listeners are going to appreciate it. And thank you very much for sharing your 20 years of knowledge in the supplier diversity space with us today.
Deborah, thank you again for inviting me. I enjoyed this conversation immensely.
So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 185th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.